We have a special guest at the top of the show. I'm always happy when our next guest makes time for our show. He's a congressman from California's 17th District. He's one of the strongest progressive voices in the Congress. He has bravely led the campaign through Congress to end our military involvement with Saudi Arabia's genocide in Yemen. And he is one of the few Congress members who has the guts to come on this show. So let's welcome Representative Ro Khanna. Hi, Ro. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Jimmy. I think that's the highlight of the show, right? It's downhill from here.
It sure is. So your legislation with Bernie to end our involvement in the Yemen genocide was passed in the House and the Senate, but was vetoed by President Trump. Now, I presume you'll be reintroducing that bill in the upcoming session. Do you foresee it going through a Democratic Congress when they know there isn't a Republican president to veto it?
It needs to go through. I mean, President-elect Biden has committed to signing it. We need to do this in the first 10 days. I mean, Jimmy, putting aside any humor or comedy, this is the most serious humanitarian catastrophe in the world. The UN has said within a few months there's going to be a famine there. They need the blockade, the Saudi blockade lifted. We're still providing spare parts to the Saudis. We're still providing arms to the Saudis. We're still providing logistics to the Saudis. We need to stop all of that. We need to demand that the Saudis and, frankly, the United States ought to be getting $2 billion into Yemen, or you're going to have one of the worst famines in human history.
So why, can you just explain what is the government's official rationale behind participating in Saudi Arabia's genocide in Yemen?
There is none. I mean, the official. I mean, it's wrong, but their claim is that it's a dispute, and that the Houthis are to blame as well, and that the Houthis are being funded by Iran, and that this is a proxy war with Iran. Now, the Houthis are not blameless. I mean, no one should think that the Houthis are somehow angels, but the reality is that if the United States were to stop our support of the Saudis, we would put so much pressure to get to a peace. And that's what Martin Griffiths wants to do. So our policy has been dictated as a countercheck to Iran. And that's why this has been going on as long as it has.
Okay. But just for people playing at home, if you don't know why we're always in bed with Saudi Arabia militaristically, it's because of the petrodollar. And Saudi Arabia was certainly seeing how far the United States would go to support them when they started doing this genocide in Yemen. And we're going all the way because of the petrodollar. Okay, and look at my other videos, which will explain what that is. So, Ro, in your opinion, so now we have Joe Biden coming into office. What does the future fight for Medicare for all look like? I mean, what challenges and opportunities should progressives prepare themselves for under a Biden presidency?
Well, I believe in Medicare for all, and I think the first step is that we should get a vote on Medicare for all in the House. We ought to have hearings, and we ought to have a vote. I think if you look at the polling, I mean, Fox News poll showed 60-70% of people believed in national government health insurance. I mean, it's something that is popular not only in blue districts, but in red districts. And my view of this Republican-led Senate is we ought to pass a bold, progressive agenda out of the House and send it up to the Senate, and then see what they will pass or what they won't pass. Realistically, do I think we're going to get the vote in the House? We'll fight for it, but it's going to be an uphill battle. At the very least, we ought to extend Medicare. The Unity Commission said extend it to 60. That seems to me at least a first step.
So you kind of alluded to it. The real impediment to passing Medicare for all would be Nancy Pelosi's failure to even bring it up for debate or vote in the House. So she won't even won't let Medicare get a debate. She's been a hindrance to all progressive policy, and she's going to be running for re-election for House Speaker. The only challenger currently on the horizon to Nancy Pelosi would be Hakeem Jeffries, who is ostensibly even more corporate than Nancy Pelosi is. So will progressives in Congress just shrug their shoulders and put up a challenger to the White House leadership, or no?
Well, she's going to win. I mean, so it would be tilting at windmill. She has support in the caucus. Now she'll be there. As she said, she's going to be there 2 more years, and progressives are working to make sure we have a progressive successor to her. But a challenge to Nancy Pelosi now would actually lead to someone elected who was more conservative. So yes, we disagree on the Medicare for all, and I've been clear about that. We made progress, though not enough progress. We got a hearing in Energy and Commerce. And I don't understand why we can't have a vote on things. I mean, I understand if people vote against it, fine, that's the democratic process. But to me, not having a vote on these policies is not democratic. And I've been very clear about that. I've shared that view with the speaker. I've shared that view with everyone. I think we ought to have a vote.
And so, to me, the reason why there hasn't been a vote is that the people who pull the strings in the United States government are corporate donors and health insurance, Wall Street, and big pharma, and they can't even that's why Joe Biden was their pick and Kamala Harris is their vice presidential pick, was because they knew they were not even going to give lip service to Medicare for all anymore, right? So that's why Nancy Pelosi won't bring up a vote. What she should have been doing since she took control of the House was passing Medicare for all and making Donald Trump and the Republicans squash it, so then you guys can run on this, right? A thing that's very popular. But the control of the donor class is so complete on Nancy Pelosi, she can't even do that. So if it was what came down between Nancy Pelosi and Hakeem Jeffries, I know you're not going to answer this. Why am I asking? Who would you vote for if it was Nancy Pelosi? Why am I even...
I vote for the Speaker Pelosi, but the Speaker Pelosi, there are areas where she has led effectively. We disagree, I know, because I know you're very critical of her, but on issues of expanding child tax credits, on children poverty, on the Reverend Barber and the Poor People's Campaign, she's been effective. The issue, though, on Medicare for All, I completely agree with you. Look, Donald Trump, in his book in 2000, came out for Medicare for All. He basically said the Canadian single-payer system is better than the system we have. This is a popular issue. There were times during the pandemic that Trump was almost hinting, saying he was going to give everyone Medicare because he understood it was a populist sentiment. And there are times that his advisor said that he really feared running against Bernie Sanders because ultimately he knew Bernie Sanders was actually promising to make people's lives better. So we had a problem in this campaign because we got unfairly tagged with labels that weren't true, but we didn't have a strong economic message to counter it, to say, actually, here's what we're going to do. We're going to raise your wages to $15 and we're going to give everyone health care. I still believe that having a vote on this, running about it, and making a villain of an obstructionist Senate is not just substantively correct, it's good politics.
So what leverage do you have, though, the progressives have in Congress to get Nancy Pelosi to do that thing that seems so obvious to everybody else who isn't bought?
Well, it's not just, look, I get your point about the corporate donors, and there's definitely part of that there, because it's not that corporate donors are going to go give money to some campaign. It's not that transparent. It's that they fund the parties, they fund the super PACs, they fund the independent expenditures, and that is a concern. I think having insurance companies put millions of dollars into a Senate race or into a House race or not fund parties, I'm sure that is one of the factors. But it's another factor, which is we have to be bolder in explaining our message. If you could give me two examples. One is on healthcare. They say socialized medicine, and if we just are mealy-mouthed, it's not going to work. What we have to say is, no, look, you get to have your same doctors at hospitals, and now every person's going to be in network. Now, right now, you don't have a choice. There are a lot of doctors that are out of network. Guess what? Under Medicare for All, every single person is going to be in network, and you're not going to pay a dime. No copays, no deductibles, no premiums. And if we don't defend it, if we're just kind of wishy-washy, then we get stuck with the baggage and we don't have an affirmative vision. Same thing with Venezuela, right? I mean, we are so tepid on that. So they say they want Guaido. Well, we ought to say, instead of saying, well, we want Guaido too, or some mealy-mouthed answer, we should say you're crazy. What your policy is going to do is actually going to strengthen Maduro. It's going to give Maduro more reason to yell American intervention, and this is exactly the type of mess that's going to make us less safe. People respect conviction, and I think the problem is we are so afraid to be bold in our ideas that it defaults to people then believing the slogans. But that's just my take.
So, okay, here's a question no one else will ask you. So, At the beginning of the pandemic, the leadership of both parties pushed through the CARES Act, right? So despite a few pieces of window dressing for regular people, this was the biggest upward transfer of wealth to the 1% in the history of the human race. And all the progressives, including Bernie Sanders and the squad, went along and voted for this. So
I voted for it, yeah.
And Pelosi put it to a voice vote to protect everybody from going on the record for or against. So when history calls upon them to oppose oligarchy and a corrupt system, what is the point of having elected progressives in power if they just go along and follow orders from their party leadership anyway?
Oh, that was not following orders. It was a tough decision. Look, I grant you that there was too much of an excess giveaway to large corporations and large businesses. But remember, it also had a $1,200 check for families. It also had increased funding for small businesses, for restaurants, for people who are hurting. It increased unemployment insurance and gave extra $600 a week plus the unemployment extension. So there were a lot of things in there that did help working families and small businesses. We can argue whether the balance you should have voted no or yes, and I think on balance it helped more than it hurt. But that was the rationale.
So we won't argue because there's nothing to argue about. You all voted for the largest upward transfer of wealth in the history of human race. Everybody knew it was coming who knew anything, who read not. It's just shock doctrine because this is exactly what they did in 2008. It's exactly what and they did it this time with like in a week and a half. It took them a few months last time, but this time they knew they got it down. They did it right away, and they got all of you to go along with that. And so they used that window dressing, that bullshit $1,200 and the unemployment extension, so you guys could hide behind that. And that was horrible what you did.
But Jimmy, you don't think that made a difference in people's lives? I'm sure you know people who got $1,200 or the unemployment extension.
So of course, Ro, that's exactly the bullshit line that's why that's in there. So you can come on here and say that while you voted for the largest upward transfer of wealth in the history of the human race during a crisis without giving health care to people and using your leverage. That's the only time that the progressives had any leverage, and you totally rolled over for the machine.
I agree with the healthcare point. I do think that that's a fair point, and we tried to fight, but maybe we could have fought in other ways. But the idea that we had the worst healthcare crisis, certainly in my lifetime, and the logical response would be, okay, let's extend healthcare, and that we have had no extension of healthcare coverage. I mean, other than saying that coronavirus treatment is free, is a failure. I mean, I will grant you that. I mean, in usually America, when there's crisis, we have a response, and I think a logical response would have been healthcare. But when you're saying the greatest upward transfer of wealth, what specifically in the $2 trillion are you pointing to? Are you talking about the grants that went to the corporations, or what specifically? So about that package?
Well, basically the CARES Act. Well, there's the multiplier also on it, which brings it up somewhere closer to $4 or $5 trillion that got funneled upward to the wealthiest 1,000 oligarchs in the country. Basically, that's what happened. So that's what I'm talking about. There's no UBI for the people. There's no job guarantee. There's no health care. But there is $5 trillion that got funneled upward. That's what I'm talking about. What are you talking about?
Well, I think a lot of that was the Fed. A lot of that was not the CARES Act. A lot of the CARES Act was the unemployment insurance, the stimulus, the small businesses. Now, I had a bill, which I imagine you followed, with Tim Ryan, who's by the way in Ohio, in a tough Youngstown district. So it shows you the appeal of this. And we said, let's just give $2,000 a month to every American. And by the way, if you're going to tell Americans you can't work, which I think was the right thing to do early on, because we had to make sure that the pandemic didn't spread. But don't you think if you're going to tell people you can't work, that the government has some obligation to pay them so that they can afford to still have rent and afford to still put food on the table? I think that would have been the smartest policy, to do the $2,000 a month. We haven't been able to get a vote on that. But if you were to say to me, is that a better policy? I would say yes.
Yeah, definitely that would be. So just how happy are you that I am the only one who will even attempt to hold your feet to the fire for the CARES Act vote? Aren't you just thrilled that I'm the only one, a pothead jagoff comedian in his garage is the only one who's going to ask you about this?
I'd say, Jimmy, I still believe in the First Amendment. I still believe that the press isn't supposed to be friends with politicians that you're supposed to ask tough questions. I go on Fox News. I go on other places. And you know, there was a conference called and leaked at the House Democrats, and I never leak, and I don't think people should be leaking, but it was all woe is me. And I said, look, being a United States congressman is like being in the 0.0000001% of privilege of humanity. You're in an extraordinary level of privilege. So if you're going to have tough questions from the press, or you're going to have someone say some not nice things about you, deal with it. Get over it. There's real people with real problems. So I think it's great. I mean, the people who were in my team were saying, why are you going on Jimmy Dore? I said, because he's a journalist. He asks tough questions. And if you can't answer it, then you should be in some other line of work.
Okay. I know. But you got to be happy at how bad the press is. Anyway, let's move on. How about our one final question? Here's my one final question for you, and thanks for coming on. But I have two questions before I get to my final one. What leverage? So now going forward, it's just, Joe Biden's just stocking his cabinet with Republicans and people from the defense, from the military industrial complex, and now his new chief of staff is a lobbyist. So what leverage now can Bernie Sanders and the progressives who are elected? What leverage do you have to get anything done for people?
Well, we have leverage. I mean, look, we started with Yemen. I believe that Yemen, Vice President-elect Biden will stop that war, and you can have me on in 2 months or 3 months, and we'll see if I'm correct. But I'm pushing, and we disagree with Ron Klain. I mean, Ron Klain, I think, will actually help get us the Yemen war powers resolution through. If we get that through, if he stops the war in Yemen, that would be a huge contribution to humanity. Beyond that, though, I think, and I tweeted out today, I mean, the Republicans are saying they want to block Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren from being in the cabinet. First of all, that's absurd because no one can question their qualifications. And in the past, the Senate has always said it's about qualifications, not about ideology, especially when it's fellow senators. But my view is we ought to be pushing to have confrontation, not just say, oh, well, McConnell says it can't be confirmed, so we're not going to do anything. We have to nominate them, force the fight. And I guess what progressives are going to do is we're going to continue to push our values and ask that we take the fight to the Senate. And we're going to continue to push as hard for that as possible. And you see, we're not backing down. I mean, progressives have been defending Black Lives Matter. We've been defending the progressive turnout, and we're not compromising on the agenda.
So there's going to be a lot of evictions coming up and a lot of foreclosures. And the last time we were in a similar economic downturn like this, Joe Biden presided over kicking 5.1 million families out of their homes. What can progressives do to protect people from Joe Biden?
Well, we need to protect people from eviction. And the eviction is something that would be dealt with in a stimulus package. I mean, we ought to have assistance for making rent payments. We ought to make sure that there's a national moratorium on evictions, and we ought to do that. I will say this, Jimmy, certainly in my life, I mean, there are things I've done and supported that I don't support and where I made mistakes. And I guess my test of President-elect Biden is what is he going to support going forward? And I'm hopeful, given the overwhelming results of the public, that want some very simple things: healthcare, education funding, making sure that we get have basic housing. That he will see that these are the policies that will make him successful, and certainly we're going to push hard for that.
Okay, I don't see. I don't mean to be too big of a pessimist, but without workers having actions and shutting things down, the essential workers, we saw that they can shut down the economy. If the grocery store workers go on strike, or the UPS, or Amazon workers, they can really shut down. So I don't see anything really happening to help people, and I hope I'm wrong about this, but I don't see anything happening without some kind of action, direct action like that coming from the streets, because like I said before, progressives don't have any leverage right now, especially on something like with these foreclosures, right? Like, what could you do to help the people with foreclosures? How could you move the corporatists in Congress to help people?
Well, we could just have laws passed, not just to help with mortgage and rent, but to pass a law to make foreclosure much more difficult and to increase people's rights to not being kicked out of their homes. and to say, look, this was a lesson of 2008, that the mistake that of increased foreclosures. But look, if you're saying to me that we need organizing on the streets, that we need that politicians move once there's a mobilization, you're right. I mean, that we do need that. One place I think that Biden is very good, and I even said this when I was Bernie's co-chair during the primary, is on labor issues. He genuinely supports labor unions. He genuinely supports proper classification of workers. None of this BS like you know, that the Lyft and Uber spending $188 million to improperly classify gig workers. So I'm hopeful that on labor issues, we're going to see progress.
Fingers crossed. That would be great if that happens. Well, listen, my final question for you is, now Kamala Harris is no longer a U.S. senator. She's vice president. And the governor of California gets to decide who's the next U.S. senator. Now, Ro, how friendly are you with Gavin Newsom?
Have you recommended me yet, Jimmy? I don't know if this interview, if I got to still be in contention.
Well, he doesn't take my calls anymore, but if he does, I'll let him know.
You know, well, look, I love what I'm doing. I obviously, you know, I'm a straight shooter. There's not a single member of Congress who, if they said, "Oh, the governor would consider you," would say, "No, I don't want to be considered." Of course, it would be an honor to be considered. But the biggest thing I'm excited about is the mobilization with the Sunrise Movement and the progressive base, and what we need to do is, whoever it is, whether, you know, Barbara Lee would be great, Karen Bass, it's got to be someone who's going to be for Medicare for all, for the Green New Deal, for progressive values. Okay,
Ro Khanna, good luck going forward, fighting for progressive ideas inside of our corrupt government. We wish you all the best. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Jimmy. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Hey, everybody, this is the part where I tell you where all our live shows are, but there aren't any. And then this is why I tell you to join our premium program and get extra content, but nobody's got a fucking job. So just enjoy the video.